way I sort of feel about Jameis Winston. I don't feel Jameis Winston is a good NFL quarterback. However, I'd be foolish to say he's not fantasy relevant. There's a lot of things pointing towards this offense. One, that they put up big numbers last year. Two, Bruce Arians is an offensive, dare I say, genius. I'll throw the tag out there. Why not?
Certainly offensive minded. Certainly, yeah, no doubt.
And three, most people think that this is probably going to be a team that's going to struggle to run the ball, that's probably going to be behind, and is going to have to throw the ball quite a bit. So all those factors say there's probably some value here in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers from a fantasy perspective, even though maybe from a football perspective, they're not quite there yet.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And look, a year ago, who in the world, I just joked about the name Ryan Fitzpatrick in Miami because he's now there with Josh Rosen, but who had Ryan Fitzpatrick on their fantasy team, much less starting in week one when he threw for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns in the Superdome against the Saints? I mean, he may very well have been on about 7 fantasy league teams and rosters last year and in the starting lineup of 2 of them. I'm talking like nationwide when the year began. But, of course, after he did that in week one and people have injured quarterbacks or quarterbacks that were no good, some people picked him up. Well, then in week 2, he turns around and throws for 400 more yards against the Philadelphia Eagles and is the NFC Offensive Player of the Week 2 weeks in a row, both in Buccaneer wins. And look, it was like euphoria, especially if you had Mike Evans. And in last year's case, he's not on the roster now because they traded him to the Eagles. But Deshaun Jackson, if you had those guys in specific, you were raking in the fantasy points, especially PPR. And if you have bonus points for yardage and big plays and things like that, it was amazing. So much so that you really didn't know what to do as last year unfolded because Fitzpatrick eventually went to the bench after Jameis Winston had been suspended. He was brought back. He started. He struggled at times with interceptions. And then Jameis went back to the bench. And it was almost like a soap opera, Jay, where they went back to Fitzpatrick and then back to Jameis one more time down the stretch of the season where he played a little better and you won a couple of games. Well, now you don't have that issue. It is going to be Jameis Winston at the start of the year. And look, for the fans that are listening here, this is going to be a pass-happy team. Byron Leftwich, the former quarterback, is the offensive coordinator for Bruce Arians, and they are pass-first and maybe even pass-second mentality for this team. Sure, they will say publicly, we have to run the ball. You want to try to get first downs on short yardage. You got to be able to pick up a yard if you need it. This is not a team.
Do they even have a running back that can do that?
I mean, Peyton Barber is a hard worker between the tackles. He's not spectacular. Ronald Jones is the second-round pick a year ago that was basically a ghost. He didn't play a year ago. That's your running back situation. So what do you think the Bucs are going to go into 2019, Jay, doing? They're going to throw the ball. They're not going to set out to throw it 50 times a game, but certainly in the first parts of games and the first halves of games, this team is going to be 75% throw probably with Jameis Winston. So I would say with Bruce Arians, and you look at what he's done, see if you recognize any of the names that Bruce Arians has worked with throughout his NFL career as a quarterback coach and a offensive coordinator. Stop me if you've heard one of these. Peyton Manning with the Indianapolis. Heard that name before. Ben Roethlisberger. How about that name? I've got that name. Andrew Luck, who's now obviously saying, deuces, I'm out. I've heard of him. He won the NFL Coach of the Year, did Arians, taking over the Colts, being the offensive coordinator, the interim head coach, leading Luck to the playoffs as a rookie. And then he ends up getting the Arizona Cardinals job the next year in 2013. They have a winning season, go to the playoffs, and Arians is the coach of the year for the second year in a row with a different team, the Colts and the Cardinals, where Carson Palmer became outstanding, winging it to Larry Fitzgerald and whomever else. So, again, Peyton Manning, Ben Roethlisberger, Andrew Luck, Carson Palmer, been in the playoffs over and over again. Look, I mean, the Bucs have got a quarterback whisperer now as their head coach, and let's see if he gets the best out of Jameis Winston, sir.
Jameis, a top 10, top 12 quarterback? Is he a QB1 or is he a QB2?
You're asking the biased guy that has seen him for his 5-year career. I don't know. Look, if you're in a 10 or 12 team league, he's got to be one of your top two quarterbacks. I'm not saying he starts right away, but I'm certainly not going to put him down in the bottom third of the league. I think he's probably somewhere in the teens, in the late teens is where you would look at him. And look, the big thing he's got to stay away from, this is no secret, is the interception. It is what has undone him really the last couple of seasons in the NFL, but it dates all the way back to his final year at Florida State. He came off the Heisman Trophy winning national championship year at Florida State, and the next year he threw interception on top of interception on top of, my God, what was that throw? Interception over and over and over again, and yet Florida State was talented enough that they kept overcoming him throwing 2 or 3 interceptions, especially early in games, and winning, and that kind of carried over to the NFL. So if he has one bugaboo, it's too many picks. So again, we may be getting into the minutia here a little bit, but if interceptions cost you in your league, then be careful about Jameis Winston, because there is a negative stat that's out there, Jay Soderberg, and that is that in the last 4 seasons, there are 2 players that have turned the ball over with fumbles and interceptions more than anybody else, and they're tied. I believe the correct number is 64 of them. 64 fumbles lost and or interceptions from quarterbacks. They are Blake Bortles, who is no longer starting for your Jacksonville Jaguars. No, he's the backup in L.A., and Jameis Winston is the other one. So take care of the football if you're number 3 in pewter and red. Take care of the ball. Don't fumble it. Don't throw interceptions. And it's going to help him greatly, and it's going to help the Bucs and their weapons greatly.
You mentioned the tight ends. Everybody knows about Mike Evans. He's a clear stud, a top wide receiving prospect. You may not have heard of Chris Godwin unless you're a longtime listener to this podcast. One of our draft guys, and I really wish I could remember which one it was, turned us on to Chris Godwin his rookie year, the year he was drafted, said this guy is going to be huge. We've seen market improvement each year moving forward, and it seems like this is going to be his breakout season.
I think you're right. And look, for fantasy sleeper purposes, I was really hoping that we would keep him under wraps a little longer, but he's everywhere. I mean, the NFL Network's morning show, Good Morning Football, I don't know if you're a big fan of that show, but I see it all the time. They have preached from the pulpit about Chris Godwin for the last month and showing his highlights in the preseason games. So, I mean, the word is out. You go on ESPN.com, you go to CBSSports.com, you do any reading on the internet, you watch the NFL on TV or on the NFL Network, you know Godwin's name for fantasy draft purposes. It would shock me in most leagues, again, depending on how big they are with the rosters, if Chris Godwin's name is not called in the first 3 or 4 rounds. He should be. If Chris Godwin, the number 2 receiver of the Bucs, as Jay was mentioning, now about to go in his 3rd year out of Penn State, excellent second receiver for the Buccaneers, because Evans is going to draw double teams all over the place. Godwin, great on 3rd down, tremendous after the catch too, by the way, for extra bonus yards. You should be drafting him. If he is sitting there in your 4th round, if you're in an 8-team or more league and Chris Godwin is still sitting there in your 4th round, you will not regret taking the young man out of Penn State. He is fantastic. And I'll give you another sleeper if you want to come back around to me from the Buccaneer receiving corps, because we've already talked O.J. Howard and Mike Evans. I'll give you another one now, or if you want it later, whatever you want to
do. Throw it out there, because I've got one more question for you regarding the Jaguars.
Yeah, and we're trying to put them off as long as possible right now in the conversation. But Cameron Brate, and I don't know how much you have talked on your show with Josh and your guests about Cameron Brate, a tight end, but this is a guy that Jameis Winston fell in love with back 2-3 years ago, especially in the red zone. And there was at one point at the end of the 2016 season and the beginning of the 2017 season, there was about a 12 to 15 game stretch, something like that, where he had more touchdown catches in the red zone than any other receiver in the NFL. Let me say that again. Not Julio Jones, not A.J. Green, not anybody else, Antonio Brown. We're talking about red zone touchdowns, not just straight bombs outside the 20-yard line. That there was about a 15-game stretch where Cameron Brate had like 12 touchdowns and like 9 or 10 of them were in the red zone. So this is a red zone target for Jameis Winston. Number 84, Cameron Brate. He was bothered by a hip injury a year ago. He ended up having the hip surgery after the season. He is fully healthy. They haven't shown him much in preseason. Again, he's not a guy to take in the first 3 or 4 or 5 rounds, Jay. But if you get to the 8th round and you need a tight end, you're in the 7th round, the 8th round, the tight ends are coming off the board. You cannot go wrong in terms of touchdown catches, because I think Cameron Brate over a 16-game season will be good for 7, 8, 9 touchdowns. Remember the Buccaneer honk telling you this in the preseason, that I'm telling you Cameron Brate, if healthy for 16 games, will get you 7, 8, 9 touchdowns this year, because Winston loves him on third down, loves him in the red zone, and you cannot cover everybody when they're trying to double Mike Evans or trying to double O.J. Howard, double them both. Cameron Brate's going to get some opportunities, Jay. I love that name.
That's the one thing that I would caution players about when you have two guys like O.J. Howard and Cameron Brate on the same team. One is going to vulture from the other. If Cam Brate is catching 9, 10 touchdowns, O.J. Howard probably isn't. Right. And it sounds like the way that you've been describing their offense so far, O.J. Howard is going to be the yards guy. Cam Brate is going to be the red zone guy. So he becomes very touchdown dependent. So
yes,
when you say 8th round, I might even wait longer, because I don't think people are going to be running out to get Cam Brate, but he's going to be that secret weapon that you can use. He's touchdown dependent. So there might be a game where you get 0 points, just because, or very few points, because he's that's where his value is. But
it's a great point you make, and he's not a guy that is going to go down the field and catch 50-yard passes. O.J. Howard can be that guy, 40 or 50 yards down the seam. He is, again, more of a possession guy on third down, and you're right. You're gonna get weeks where he gets 0 or 1, maybe 2 weeks in a row in terms of points, but then you'll get a week where you get 15 because he catches a couple of touchdowns. That's the way that it's been when he's healthy. But that's an excellent way to put it. And again, it depends completely on your league. I mean, we're still in the preview of drafting. And the one piece of advice, because I've been playing fantasy a long time like you have, I have been playing fantasy since 1990. My God, I'm old. And the one thing that I've lived by in all these different leagues is understand how big your league is, how long your draft is, and what the rules are. And if you understand, I've got 16 rounds in my draft. There are going to be 16 rounds, and we only have, let's say, like 8 teams in my league. Then no, Cameron Brate is not somebody you're looking at in the 7th or 8th round. I'm in another insane league that has 14 teams in it, and we only draft, I believe, 14 rounds. They're big on free agency. Wow. So they're big on transaction wire and big on money for okay, you want to add and drop, it costs you money. That's a big part of it. Yep. There's only like 14 or 15 rounds in this draft with 14 teams. I'm looking at Cameron Brate in the middle of that draft because, goodness, the tight ends are gone usually by the 9th or 10th round. Everybody's drafting kickers and defense at that point. So it's just another part of the strategy of what does your draft do?
Real quick here, TJ, just on the Jacksonville Jaguars. Yeah. A lot of focus was placed on the quarterback position for the Jaguars. Yeah. I have said all along, there is more wrong with that team than just the quarterback. You don't lose that many games just because of your quarterback. Now, they still have some big names on that defensive side of the football, yes. But would you still consider that defense fantasy relevant if you're playing in leagues that play with defense?
I would say yes, and it would depend, too. Do you get the special teams also, or are they split?
Yes.
That defense is going to take the ball away. They have outstanding defensive players. I'll tell you who I'm big on. Yes, Foles is the free agent acquisition at quarterback. That's going to help the receivers. I'm really big on not in the 1st or the 2nd round and maybe not the 3rd round, but everybody's going to be wondering, and again, it's how big is your league? Leonard Fournette. I think this is a bounce-back year for him just because he is maybe still on the verge of being out the door in Jacksonville. Because he's battled injury problems. He's battled off-field problems. He got suspended for a game a year ago because of a fight. He got arrested in the offseason in Jacksonville for speeding and unpaid speeding tickets. They finally made that kind of go away without any jail time. There's been questions about his work ethic, how much he cares. He's lost a little weight. He appears to be in great shape. He ran hard in their preseason game with the Dolphins the other night, Jay. I think that Leonard Fournette is an excellent second or maybe